So thank you for joining us for this meeting of the ARPA subcommittee, whatever our committee name is. And as you heard, this meeting is being recorded and we're going to dig right into the agenda because we have a lot to talk about. So we're going to start with approving last week's minutes. Hope everyone had a chance to take a peek at them. And unless there are any objections, I'm going to vote for approval of last week's minutes. I'm going to start with, all right, Brian.
Sorry, I moved it, but you didn't ask for that.
No, it's okay. I'm going to start. Yes or no? Do you approve the minutes?
Yes, I do. Yes, I very much do.
Arthur?
Yes.
Jenny?
Abstain.
Sorry?
I wasn't here.
Abstain.
I wasn't here.
And John?
Yes.
And Melissa, are you and Tyler voting members? No. All right. And the chair votes yes. The minutes have been approved. Thank you. All right. So we thought we'd start off with Melissa and or Tyler talking a little bit about the buckets, kind of like the bigger, we've got 20 some, and I say 20 some because, if we end up at 21 million, okay, but we want to keep it close to 20 million. 20 some $million that we're giving out in phase one, but we're trying to kind of generally think about the emphasis of where that money should go. So Melissa or Tyler, take it over. And this is, by the way, based on the community. A lot of this is community input based on the work of the Brookline Community Foundation in conjunction with, the town administrator's office. So that's what we're going to look at. Now I will stop talking.
We actually circle back to that. I haven't had a chance to put that together yet, but I can do that in I just need a couple of minutes to put that
absolutely
together.
We can absolutely circle back to that. So we'll just do a general check-in with everybody. How did it go? Is everybody done scoring? I think everybody finished, correct?
No.
Arthur, but you're almost done, right? When I
Yes,
talked to you this morning, you were close already. Okay. How's it going? I'll start with just how I felt about it, which is I tried not to get bogged down in the details because this is just one part of, this is just to kind of help us float to the top, the ones we should be discussing. We're not going to be able to discuss all 80. It's just impossible, right? So which one should we be spending our time on? And to me, I found that this was very helpful for that. Some of them dropped off right away. Some of them I have recommendations they can apply next time. So I'm just wondering how it went for everybody else.
I thought it was great. I enjoyed reviewing the applications. I thought the level of thoughtfulness and comprehensiveness in a lot of the proposals was very impressive. I did end up speaking with the Department of Planning and Community Development because there were a number of applications from that one department. And I have a better sense of their priorities and also some of the things that that we could consider as we move forward into funding conversations. I really didn't have a lot of gaps in reviewing them. And I'm very excited to talk about the bigger picture stuff, beyond just the proposals that I reviewed, because I think, to your point, there's $20 million and there's probably just about $200 million worth of great ideas.
Yes, exactly.
160.
160 now. So I will say to Jenny too, that I ended up speaking with public health today, and exactly that. We kind of together said this one needs to go back to the drawing board and be resubmitted, cut this one down, and I can justify funding it, or at least bring it to the discussion for the rest of the committee and recommend funding it. And I thought that was very, very helpful also, because there were just so many, it was hard to decide to which ones. I mean, some of them made sense, some of them didn't. And getting that perspective from the department head was very helpful. Anyone else want to, Arthur, you look like you're.
Yeah, so I was at the other end of the spectrum in terms of community-based proposals, okay? And for me, that's the meat and potatoes of what this community is all about. If we can get down to the grassroots, then I think we can make a difference in the lives of people who are affected by the pandemic.
Yeah.
This is on the ground. So I talked to some people. I didn't talk to a lot, but I think it's so important that we reach down to those individuals, okay, who are enmeshed in the community. Okay, they're not at town hall. They're walking the streets. They're going into the apartments. They're reaching out to children in the schools and so on and so forth. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to say that I sent the email out, but to bring to the public's attention, you may have noticed that the highest score a town department could get on the second scoring sheet was 85 out of 100, but community programs could get up to 100 out of 100. So I actually think that was that was not intentional, at least not by me. But once I realized that was happening, I was actually happy, because to me, that automatically elevates community programs above town departments, which I think is exactly what you're talking about. And I think, again, I agree with you. We do want to really center the community here. So that helps us do that.
And also,
yeah.
I didn't say it, but I also think that if they do come up short, there's a door open for the second rounds, okay? And they can improve on the proposals that they've submitted, okay, in the mistakes that they've made, and come back again with an improved.
Exactly, 100%. How about you, John or Brian? Giant.
I'll take it as a compliment. Yeah, I thought it was a very good way to get started and to get introduced to some of the proposals. But as an exercise that's going to help us decide, almost all the scores were in a very narrow range. So
it's interesting. Yeah. That was not my experience.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Okay. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Brian?
I had a lot of trouble with the spreadsheets. So that was, I felt, I finally know how my parents felt when they had to ask me for help with a computer issue, as I had to ask my high schooler to help me. So thank you for that, everybody. Appreciate it. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I guess there were some technical issues there, but I also found speaking to DPW department head very helpful. Aaron helped clarify, and we talked a lot about maybe pull this one out from this one and stuff like that. So I think it'll be a stronger process altogether. And I think I didn't really, no offense, I didn't pay too much to what the select board preferences were. I sort of wanted to go through it once without that in my head, and then look at it sort of on the back end. So
I think, we'll talk about this next, but, as we move, what I'd like is, in terms of moving the process forward, the two things I want us to do next, or have done by the end of this, I want us to look at the scores. We'll do that next. We'll just look at the master spreadsheet. Tyler sent it around just so we can get an idea of where the scores are falling. And then Tyler, Melissa, and John and I can do a little math in the background and find an appropriate cutoff for next week. What I'd love to do too is get your, I think what we need to do is kind of identify our top 5 to 10. And then, using the scores are helpful, like, to guide what my top 5 to 10 are. And if we can get a list of that, then that's what we can discuss next week is our top 10 for each. And we can kind of each present why we think these particular ones should be funded. And if we get our list of top 10 to Melissa and Tyler, we can actually also get an idea of where we are in terms of cost figures, right? because some of mine, I've already made my list, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 9, and I know it comes to about 3 million. So depending on, mine were a lot. I had several that were smaller figure amounts that were easy to fund the whole thing, that were, just aren't going to have a big impact in their bottom line. So it'll be good for us to narrow down not only the proposals, but what we're talking about in terms of how much we want for those proposals. So the things it is on the agenda as discussion points. So what I'm going to say, instead of looking at the master score sheet, let's just talk quickly about the discussion points, and then we'll go look at the master score sheet. Is that okay with everybody? So the things I want us to think about, which is exactly what Brian already brought up, which is, do take a look at, the select board in the end makes the final decision, right? So their input needs to be considered. I've been lucky because so far the things that I like that had good scores have been things that have been supported by several select board members, but just keep in mind what's there, and at some point, it doesn't have to be now, right? But we should be considering that. The other things that I think are really that we have to think about are redundancies, and Melissa's going to talk a little bit about. There are a lot of requests for cars. You may have noticed that. Did you all notice that? Well, for some of us, there were a lot of requests for cars. And initially I was like, oh, that's a lot of redundancy, but Melissa, I'm going to let you make your point about the car request.
Of course. So, a lot of what we needed to do when we were reducing budgets because of COVID, because our local receipts have declined, is we had to make reductions across departments. And knowing that, we were hopeful that there would be a rebound in revenue, the things that we cut were, instead of people, we were cutting equipment. And so this grant is helpful because I think, we can't sustain a cut like that without deterioration in the fleet and operations of departments. And so that's why you see a lot of vehicles in DPW and other departments on the list, because we made those choices so that we could avoid having to lay people off. And so that is, in terms of, my prioritization, I really feel that if we don't do that, that the town, general financial position and, town department's ability to service the public would be compromised. So
we don't
just
have to
some
fund every
background.
car, but just so you know why you see so many cars. And then the other thing I think that we should be taking into account, and I saw this a lot, I had mostly low budget requests. I mean, I had a few proposals for, 3 million. But some of mine were 50,000, 150,000. And you get a lot of bang for your buck. And a lot of those had a direct programming, that money really went to programming. So I would say there should be some value added for something that you can fund at a lower amount that has a large reach. So I think that should be part of our consideration. So you're welcome to disagree with me if anyone disagrees with me, but I think, if we can fund 10 programs that fully instead of 3, I think there's value in that, because we're going to reach a lot more people with 10 programs than 3, likely, right? Obviously, depending on the program. And I think we already talked about asking town departments to prioritize their asks. And Melissa and Tyler can help with that too. Melissa knows some of the priorities as well. I had a great meeting with Sigal today to talk about the public health and exactly what needs to go back to the drawing board and be revamped for give me a much smaller budget, we can fund it, and then we'll see a bigger proposal the second time around that's a little bit more in line with what we're looking at, less personnel, more programmatic, more project focused. So please feel free to, we should, if it sounds like people have done that, but, and then the other thing that I think is super, super important is money that makes money. So a proposal that will open the door to matching grant should be weighed a little more heavily. And I'll tell you, I'm thinking very specifically of the Brookline Housing Authority. You know, if we give them a certain amount of money, it's going to open doors for them to get much more. We should be facilitating that. That's how I think about that grant. Anything else people want to put out there that we should be considering as we go forward with these discussions? Those are the things that came to my mind.
I had a couple of thoughts, but I didn't want to cut anybody else off.
No, go for it, John. And we'll get to the questions in the chat in a minute.
I just want to share the thought with everyone that I find it really hard to think in terms of, do I think this is something that should be funded, until I've looked at all of the requests, not just my list of requests. I really need to see the big picture, the global picture, in order to decide the ones that I was asked to evaluate. Where would I put them in terms of priorities? And the other thing that just occurred to me is I'm kind of surprised that there were no requests, as far as I can tell, from the police department. Do we understand why certain departments would have asked for nothing?
No, I noticed that too. And I don't know if you recall, John, but I mentioned that when the police presented to their budget to us on Tuesday, and they didn't really have a response.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer to that. Of course, there's phase 2, so they can answer that. To your first question, if that's how you want to work, that's totally up to you. You have access to you have access to all the attachments and all the other proposals. There's no way I could read 80 proposals. And frankly, some of the ones like the DPW and housing planning ones are, I'll just say it, they're above my head. I wouldn't know if they're doable or good, or I just wouldn't have that expertise. So for me, like, as I read my 19 proposals, some of them were really clearly ones we couldn't or wouldn't move forward on. So that's how I'm using this process. But do whatever works for you, right? If you want to wait before giving your kind of top 10 out of your proposals, that's fine. This is not meant to be prescriptive. It's just meant to help us get the job done in the time we have to do it in as transparent and kind of as fair. Obviously there's subjectiveness. There's no way to get past that, but to make it as objective as possible.
Miriam, if I could just add that in terms
Please.
of, the government services bucket, I think that is something that likely we would need to understand the committee's priorities, but then also I think there's still evolving conversations with the school superintendent about their needs. So that might be something that becomes the recommendation of the town administrator, with the committee prioritization kind of layered on top of that as well. Because I think that there is still a pretty substantial gap on the school side that we need to figure out what is feasible to try and address their needs.
This might be a good time for Tyler to talk about the buckets, unless
Can
Brian.
I ask one quick question of Melissa? So there's legislation recently filed around premium pay at a statewide level. Where do we stand on that? Or do you think that's something we should be considering, or should we leave that up to the Commonwealth?
So I think that it's still evolving. And so I had a meeting last week out in Rentham with a bunch of mass managers, and someone threw out the question, who here is doing premium pay? 3 hands raised. So I think it's still a very mixed, I think there's still a lot of conversations around it. And I think that's something that the select board should definitely talk about and determine whether or not they want a program to be formulated. And then we can, proceed from there.
So, and I can speak to that too, Brian, which is, I have talked to Heather about it, and it's actually part of the announcements today officially. It's on my agenda for the announcements, but we'll just talk about it now. It's something that I think needs to come from either the select board or the town administrator's office. And we do intend to pursue that for phase 2 funding. But I think it's really good we waited, because it might be now coming from someplace else. There's a lot of moving parts still on premium pay. So it is something we have our eye on. And I'll be happy to share that, there was a proposal for premium pay. The way the proposal is, you'll see it scored very, very low. So we won't be discussing it further, but I want it to be clear that we will be discussing premium pay in phase 2, one way or the other.
Can I jump in here just for a second? Is
Of
that-
course, Arthur.
So I'm as happy as a pig in a sty that you've given me the proposals that I have. Really, that's somebody up there likes me, or someone, okay? And I just want to make sure that in the final selection, okay, that this committee, this subcommittee, keeps a certain part of the pie available for the group of programs that I'm responsible for. I'm not saying that it should be half, or that it should be 3/4, or that it should be, 10 million or whatever, but that those individuals, okay, are considered in some way, shape, fashion, or form, okay, in terms of the money that's being doled out, okay?
Arthur, this is a perfect segue to what Tyler's going to talk about.
Okay,
Good. Take it away, Tyler.
Lovely. All right, I got it ready this time, so I apologize about that. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Let me
but
hide this.
not the print,
What was that?
but not the print. Can
It's-
you,
It's so small.
Too small.
Oh,
We're
okay.
old, Tyler. Make it
Sorry,
bigger.
I am privileged because I have this big giant screen, so it's so easy
Yeah.
for me. I'm not
Well,
even
he-
wearing my glasses.
Yeah,
right now.
good. That's good. Okay.
Miriam,
perfect.
while he's pulling that up, there's some chatter in the chat that I just want to clarify. These are
Yeah.
not, when we're talking about vehicles and capital equipment for town departments, I'm not talking about personal vehicles. I'm talking about equipment that's used to provide town services. So trucks, plows,
Yeah.
front end loaders, those kinds of things.
I'll give a good example is the DPW, not DPW, the Department of Public Health, the public health nurse who has to drive to people's houses to do checks for like tuberculosis meds and things. That their car is a 2003. I mean, I can't, 2003 on like Honda. So that, they're requesting funds to replace that car. I think, so it's something like that.
we can give them a bicycle?
Yeah, I'm sorry, a 2003 Honda is practically a bicycle, Arthur.
That would align with some of the transportation priorities of the town, though. So
All right.
All right.
Oh, sorry, Bonnie. Assumed it was, no, we actually meant cars. All right, Tyler.
So just a basic overview of everything that we've gotten in. As I've gone through and started to score some of these with Melissa, we've kind of put these in buckets. The first thing I have to say is, like, when we're looking at these proposals, these are the buckets that Mel had laid forward at a select board meeting, like back in February, just to sort of capture those community priorities. There is a lot of overlap with these. So just like Miriam said earlier, there's subjectivity. Some of these could fall more in government operations, some vulnerable populations. They can sit almost in multiple buckets. So we're trying to use our best judgment to put them in there. And a lot of this could still change. It's an evolving process. So as we get more info, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go, you finish.
I was just going to say, as we're getting more information from the applicants as well, it gives us more insight into where these fall.
And
So
what I want to point out to you, Arthur, is the vulnerable populations, which I think the majority of your grants address,
Right, exactly.
has the biggest bucket. It is the biggest bucket.
Okay,
So our goal is, in fact, to elevate vulnerable populations.
yes, that it's 60% of the overall 20 million, that the bucket that we're aiming for. So 60% at 12 million. As far as looking at all of the proposals we've received so far, we're kind of in line with that actual trend, looking between the buckets. Obviously, and the government ops, but that's because there's a lot of large, like, CIP projects in here, a lot of infrastructure. But the proportionality of everything else between vulnerable population technology and infrastructure, economic recovery is kind of nicely also following how we set these buckets up. That's kind of just like a really high level overview.
Tyler, there's a question in the chat for you.
All right, hold on. So I can't see the.
Oh, I can read it.
The
Is the
funding
number
row-
in the funding row refer to the amount of funding requested?
Yes. So this is the funding that's been requested. So this 164 million is the total, and then I've broken that out into each bucket for a total request. Yeah. And same with the counts, and then I broke it out by the actual percentage. So.
Great. Thank you. I'm gonna have Tyler stop sharing so that we can see each other's faces a little bit more. Are we ready to take a look at the kind of overall, how the scoring sheet looks now that we've got some scores in? Sounds like pretty much everyone except Arthur. I wonder if it's at some point, I'll look at this. So sorry to the public. I think this is available to the public, but sorry to the public for a minute. We're just going to look at these scores. Should we do it as a shared screen, Tyler?
Yeah, because this current
Yeah.
version is not
Okay.
online.
Yeah.
I was
All right.
still working on this up until the meeting started, so
Okay.
I was still getting everyone's scores.
Great.
So let me know where I'm driving, but just tell me where to go.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, I just think it's interesting to see. Oh, look at that.
Hey, let me hide these so you can actually see where the score, because
Oh, is there a total score anywhere? I wonder if we should do a total score too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if we want to just do like an average.
Yeah, or an average. That's good.
And then I can sort by that just to give us a sense
Yeah.
of where we're at. Nope, not that.
Well,
Can I
those
just jump
aren't-
in
yeah,
for
'cause
one?
those don't have scores yet. Yeah.
Nope.
One second on the scoring thing, because we didn't talk about this, but in
yeah.
my scores, I actually, there were some that I just left blank in my score sheet because I just wasn't sure
Okay.
that the proposal made it clear that they were helping specific populations, for example. So the score might be lower than what it could actually be, just to clarify my own score sheets.
So the question is for you, Jenny, do you think if you reached out to the applicants, they could answer that question for you? And I suppose if the answer is no, then you might just want to put no in the scoring sheet.
I would have to go back through. I mean, for the ones that I was certain, because it was very clear, I scored it, obviously, accordingly. I'd have to go back, Miriam. I'm not, there were a lot of different ones where it was
Yeah.
blank.
Look at that. We got our first 100. Is that the only 100? And of course, it's like $7 million.
Mhm.
On our end, this was another
Well,
conversation.
we can talk about that one. That's me. I'm glad to.
Oh, because that's TBD. I see the averages. So when, okay, great. So we should only be looking at the average when they're, so, and we should, Jenny, to be clear, I think we can talk about these today too, how you want to handle them. Let's look at let's kind of scroll slowly through, and then we can talk about the ones that we had trouble.
Well, can we address that one that Denny, held off on scoring, the Kent Street, the big one,
Sure.
7 million?
Sure.
Because I also had a question in my mind about it. Maybe it's the same as Jenny's question. Is this the only source of funding for that?
So what I was, before we want to talk about this one, I mean, this one, I would say we would fund part of it now and maybe part of it consider later. That Center Street should happen now, but the Kent Street one, let's wait till perhaps after town meeting, because the issue that they're trying to receive funding for is related to parking. And there's going to be a warrant article to discuss that parking requirement at town meeting. So I think it makes sense to wait until after would be my recommendation, which is why I was going to suggest talking about it. So, I mean, I actually already have funding recommendations for all of mine. This is not one of the ones that I left blank.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jenny.
This is one that I'm more certain about. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, I also have funding recommendations for all of mine.
That might be
Um,
good homework for next week, kind of, now that you've scored it, then you can, if there's a revised number that you'd like to recommend, you could provide that to us. And then we could talk about that along with the final scores next week.
So maybe what does everybody think of this? If by Tuesday, everybody sends their final funding recommendations to Melissa and Tyler, and we can make a sheet of the top ones. And then Friday, we could just start discussing the top ones and how we recommend that, how we kind of want to put together the final list. But how does that feel for everybody?
Are you saying final funding recommendations across the board, everything?
So I have, out of the 19 that I read and scored, I have recommendations if I think they should be fully funded, partially funded, funded for 2 years or whatever. And because I talked to Sigal about some of the department ones, I have some revised budgets. So, and I can, what I would do is send to Melissa, I could send it to, in fact, probably it's better. Is it an OML if I send it to the whole group?
I would just send it to us, the ARPA review email.
Okay.
And then, we can deal with it that way. Because what we're doing right now is we're taking the feedback from the committee, putting it into this spreadsheet, and then
Yeah.
Tyler's going to be posting the spreadsheet so that everybody sees it. So that
Right,
should be
okay.
how it works. You give us the
Yeah.
information,
Yeah.
we put it out there.
Yeah.
So.
So by Tuesday, send to Melissa and Tyler and the ARPA review email your top, how it is you would spend the bucket of proposals you reviewed. And John, that should give you time to review other proposals and other people's buckets if that's something you need to do to help you make a decision.
Yeah, I've already actually done that, but
Great.
yeah, I if you don't mind, just one more point about this one that we're looking at, this 2125, $7 million, Kent Station Street and Center Street. Getting back to my question, the Center Street project, I pretty much thought we already were planning to put the money into that project, and so I'm just having a hard time getting my head around the idea that
Why
if
it's
not
here.
for ARPA, huh?
What you mean, why they're asking for ARPA money?
Yeah. I mean, I can't sort of
Question.
figure out, like, if not for ARPA, we weren't going to do this. We were always going to do this, I thought. But then the Kent Street, I know there's an issue, and I think some people are also aware of this, that, yeah, we could use the ARPA money for that project, but people who know all the numbers for that project say it would be an unprecedented level of subsidy per unit, way outside the range of what we've done in the past. And that's an important piece of information to know, before we just decide because we've got ARPA money and it's housing, we'll fund it.
Well, I'll say, to be fair, I don't think anybody's thinking it's ARPA money, it's housing, we'll fund it for anything. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's just not how this is being approached. But I think you asked a good question. And Melissa, can you help us out? Do we know the answer to that? Or Jenny, do you know the answer?
The answer regarding Center Street is we did provide trust money through the Housing Advisory Board, but we would like to be able to keep that trust money if possible, replenish essentially the trust because it is at a very low point. And this is outlined in that proposal, actually, with more detail, John, if you're interested.
Thanks.
But yeah, that was the reasoning behind 108 Center Street, in order for just sort of to swap out the funding source. Kent Street is different. It would be a very high level of subsidy to essentially subsidize parking.
So I think, Jenny, to answer your, and maybe I'm not answering your question, but to answer what I think is answering your question, and please guide me if I'm wrong, but I think you can absolutely say we should split this out, that we'll fund this part of it now and come back for phase 2 to fund once this other part of it has been resolved.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the conversation I had with Sigal was I think that, one of the things that I'm going to recommend we fund in phase 1 will actually inform your reapplication of a request in phase 2, right? So let's do it that way. pull out the emergency thing that you need so we can fund that, and the rest will reevaluate in phase 2. Now, I want to be very careful about what we promise for phase 2, because we still will only have, 22 or $23 million. So we need to be thoughtful about that part too also. But yes, I think you can absolutely do something like that. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, these were just going to be my recommendations. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of how we handle phase 2, I think we can speak about that separately as a group too.
Yeah. So, so next steps, I think you can probably stop sharing unless, do we want to scroll through these some more? What do you guys want to do?
Can we look at the whole list real quick?
Sure.
Yeah.
Tyler, slowly.
And this is in order of the average, right?
The average is going to be right here on the right, and then
Yeah.
this from J is ours, and then this is committee.
Say that last part again. This is going to be.
So
Just freeze the panes at the top of the panel and you'll be able to see what the
Oh,
titles
yeah.
are.
I could, couldn't I?
Column L is the average.
Right. That's right. And again, I'm just going to keep saying it, and mostly for us and for the public, I'm just going to remind everyone, the scores are just here to help us. We still have to prioritize certain communities and buckets. So, right, vulnerable populations are going to be prioritized. So keep that in mind. The scores are a guide, and we're still going to, something that has a lower score may very well be funded over something that has a higher score because of how it works and who it serves, et cetera.
And I would just also add that there's a cap on the revenue replacement category. So we might have a project that's $20 million that only fits in that category. We wouldn't be able to fund it because we have a limit on revenue replacement.
Thank you. That's an excellent, very important point. All right.
Miriam, I see Jenny has her hand raised.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I only had one application around revenue replacement, and it was actually one that I scored lowly. It has like the lowest of all of my scores probably,
I like
but
that
I think
lowly.
lowly. I don't know why that came out that way, but it did. And you heard it.
Tried to say, do you remember Richard Scarry
So-
and the worm, Lowly the worm?
Yeah, I must have been thinking of that. But I had actually a question about that one. Is this an okay time for that question?
Anytime is an okay time.
Okay, so that one is about scanning documents, historical documents. And I was just curious if that's like a town-wide thing, or is it limited to that particular department? Because it also noted in the application that the project for the building department was actually funded through the IT budget previously. So I just got a little bit confused with that one.
Yep.
And was curious if that's like a town-wide thing. I'd like to consider it that way rather than just for, I'm just curious about sort of the original source of funds and then how that's done town-wide.
Sure. So, in years past, we've found funding for IT projects in the CIP, and a lot of that has been kind of equipment purchases. We've kind of converted from that to software as a service. So we don't have funding in the CIP for IT specific equipment because now they're licenses and everything's in the cloud. And the IT director, prior to Fung being on board, when he had additional funding available, he would allow the building department to digitize their documents. And they have been doing that to a certain extent over the years. But with the evolution of the IT funding going from CIP to operating budgets, that pool of money is no longer available. So he's looking to continue that project.
Thank you for that explanation. That's helpful.
Yep, staff score, just from the chat question, that would be Tyler and myself.
Great. Oh, somebody asked in the.
But those are, if there are town projects that people need some additional background, definitely give me a call or let me know that you have a question, because we've probably seen them all in one iteration or another over many, budget requests. So
Tyler, do you mind scrolling to the next?
Nope, not at all.
Mhm.
I'm just kind of pausing when y'all talk so we can.
No, it's good.
and I think we definitely feel that the next round, we may want to refine the scoring sheet as well.
Yeah,
Um,
oh, yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. I mean, it got us, it was helpful, but yes, I think it needs some.
Yeah,
revision.
it's not perfect. It's just a way to try and create some parameters around this. But Tyler and I also were kind of struggling as we were going through this.
Yeah,
Kind of because it's what the goal of our score sheet was, to really ensure compliance with the grant. And there are, we know that there are some entities like town departments and nonprofits that have been around for a while that we feel pretty confident in their ability to comply with the grant. But there are some newer entities that we're not as familiar with, and the onus of complying with all of the federal requirements are going to be on the applicants. And so
Yeah.
we need to be absolutely sure that they can do that. Otherwise, that's going to be a real challenge.
yeah. All right.
There's also federal procurement laws that need to be followed with these as well. We were talking last week with some municipal managers who had smaller allotments of ARPA, and they said, I have an HVAC project, but it's so daunting to comply with the federal regs. It's easier for me to just fund it in the CIP. So, it's just something to consider. You really need to be able to manage all of the requirements of ARPA and the federal procurement rules.
Is that, I didn't see that one before. Is that a 7.9 million premium pay for the schools?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to,
I jumped up.
I don't want to, second guess Sam's from the school department thinking on this. The school department request came in pretty late, and I think they pretty much did what they could to cover what is the gap in their budget by matching some requests to some categories.
Yeah.
So when I saw that, I thought to myself, that's just probably one way of covering the gap in the budget. But I don't know what other people thought.
But
Well,
they
I think-
also,
Go ahead, Melissa.
oh, sorry, there may also be unaware of the rules around premium pay. So for premium pay, there are income limits, and there are also, people who work remotely are not eligible for premium pay. So that's kind of the difficulty, is that you want to be able to give it to everyone, but there are limits to what you can do.
And John, it might be helpful for you to have a conversation with Linus directly, with all the, to say, here are the proposals that came through. What are your, what are the priorities here in terms of?
I wasn't actually reviewing, or was I? I guess I
You were in
was. Yeah,
school.
I
Yeah, you
was.
were.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And say, school employees. Okay.
Can I say something else about the school request while we're at it?
Yes.
Because
and then
this
yeah,
gets to the question of what isn't really captured, by some of our processes here. The school committee had a very in-depth presentation last night on where they are with their budget and with their budget gap. And essentially, what they heard described is that just to get the gap reduced by another, I think it's 1.8 million, they're going to have to lose 20 some odd staff through attrition. And then if they actually couldn't get money for the remainder of the gap, they would have to terminate like 44 staff people. So, the question of whether this money is going to save the jobs of 44 people isn't really something that's captured in the way we do this scoring, as far as I can tell.
Well, again, John, I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. The scoring is one small part of the process, right? So that's an important piece for you to bring as you review those scores. And again, that's valuable for you to talk to Linus. And to me, if it were me doing schools, it would be more important for me to prioritize the funding to keep the 44 people than it would be to do $7 million in premium pay.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
yeah.
So
I
we
don't-
have
I don't-
$20 million to give out. We can't, to me, $7 million in premium pay is, this is part of this discussion that we're having now. That is what we should be doing now, talking about exactly this. So I think
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And I think it'll be helpful for you to meet with Linus or chat with him on the phone or whatever, and just say, look, you know, it's a very fixed, we have a very fixed amount. Tell us where it is you really need it. And then Jenny had her hand up, and then Brian has a hand up, and then I'm going to answer the question in the chat.
My question is pretty simple. If that, I would love to see this spreadsheet, not just with the weighting on the score, but rather the weighting, putting them into categories, those 4 categories that you had organized. If that's possible. So you might have to reorganize the sheet completely, but like as it related to that, there was another part of the spreadsheet we were looking at. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny and Brian.
Thanks. I was going to say that given the ramifications of premium pay across all the bargaining units, I really don't feel like we can, I would suggest we don't take any action on premium pay requests in the first tranche. It is so, the ramifications just keep moving exponentially almost. So I don't think we have enough information right now to say yes or no on premium pay. Plus, based on what you said earlier, Miriam, about what you want to do in the second round, plus sort of what I said about the state, I think this problem might take care of itself.
Yeah.
So I think we should just not do any in this round.
So I don't have any problem. I think that's a good choice. I agree with that, frankly. What do other committee members think? So the discussion is, do we, for round 1 at least, many moving parts, lots of complicated things, potential for the state to pick this up. So the discussion is, should we just remove any premium pay proposals from consideration?
I agree with Brian.
I also agree.
Arthur?
I also agree.
Okay, great. So, thank you. And I'm just going to answer a question in the chat. It looks for many of these proposals, the difference between the staff score and the committee score is pretty wide. Curious as to how you're thinking about that. Are there different scorecards being used on the staff side versus the committee side? Yes, they are different scorecards. They are evaluating different things. The staffs is evaluating, you know, does the proposal actually meet criteria? Can it be executed? Can all the different kind of government requirements be met? And the committee side is more, are we keeping in mind the priorities of the community that they had identified, and especially focusing on vulnerable populations. Did I get that pretty well? Sorry.
There's also,
that is, yes.
You got a really, for our side, that one thing I would add is we also have the safety and liability component. And when we say that, we're thinking about any sort of risk perception, especially on the town side. The one piece of safety we're focused on, especially, is COVID risk and mitigation, and then assets that the town has as well. So are there any liabilities? So that's another piece of our scoring sheet. They're low, but it doesn't mean they're bad projects. A lot of stuff is falling through. And the one thing I'll say is most of them kind of fall within that range. It's not a judgment of the project. It's just the way it's kind of falling into the scoring rubric that we have. So
what's our average score for everything? Was it around like 50 or 60, right?
something along those lines.
Yeah, 60.
Yeah.
So
it's not like a report card. Like a 60 is not a D.
Not a failing grade.
On our end, it's not a bad grade. a lot of stuff's going to fall around that.
We have, if you want to go to the chat, thank you very much. Melissa has actually put the links for the scoring tools, so you can see the 2 different tools that were being used. And I'm going to say it again and again and again. The tools are just, these scores are just a tool for us to get started on the discussion. So, great. And what else? Should we just keep scrolling a little bit?
Can we talk a little bit about requests that seek full-time or part-time positions?
Yes. So thank you, Brian. We did talk about, this is one of the things we talked about last week. But you want to take it or you want me to go?
Well, I just, obviously, again, speaking of ramifications and possible unintended consequences, we're going to have, if we do hire these folks on grant funded positions, they have to know it's soft money, and the departments have to know it's soft money. And it could go away, and it will go away unless, the town picks it up in the operating budget. So I kind of looked at, I guess, I looked at requests to hire bodies as not as favorably, I guess I would say, given that it puts additional pressure on the town, and the very point of this is to sort of take pressure off the town. I just wanted to state that publicly, A, and B, I wish we had a better way to do this, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I thank you for reiterating that, for reminding us of that. And I definitely, again, I use my example because I met with Segal. That was definitely a part of our conversation too, right? Because we can't add $3 million to the town's operating budget when these grants end, right? And then does that department have the capacity to absorb that money? What's their plan? And I think, to be frank, just to say we'll find funding someplace else is not a plan. I don't consider that a plan. So
Hope is not a plan.
No, hope is not a plan. So Melissa has pointed out to me that we are actually at 2:57, and I would still like to take public comment. And I also have a few announcements. So what I'm going to do is, how is the committee? Anybody have anything pressing, or may I move on to public comments? All right, let's open it up for any public comments.
Okay, so we have 19 attendees. Anyone that would like to speak, please raise your hand. Okay, we have Mary, who will be promoting.
Just briefly, I had put it in the chat, but I'm a little bit, and I think this is, I'm just a little bit confused. Is the point of the ARPA funds, and I think this is hard, well, this is what I don't understand. Is the point of the ARPA funds to fix budget shortfalls of the town? Or is the point of the ARPA funds to fix, to help individuals and communities that have suffered from COVID? Because I think those are different objectives.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So the point of the ARPA fund is to mitigate the effects of COVID, both on the structures of the town and on the community as it was affected. So it's a both and. And so what we are trying to do, and what we have tried to do, is make it a very community engaged process by having the Brookline Community Foundation highlight what it is the town has identified as its top priorities. And some of those, that's why we have 12 million allocated for the vulnerable populations category. But some of those things that the town highlighted did include housing, affordable housing, transportation, public health infrastructure. So the answer, it is both and, with an emphasis on the community. So that's what we're trying to do here, is find, and again, we know we're not going to make everybody happy, but we're trying to find that intersection where we can do do all of those things to the best of our ability. So I hope that answers your question. Any other public comment? Okay, so if you think of something before the meeting ends, please raise your hand. A couple of quick announcements. As you heard the discussion, we are not going to consider premium pay for this round because there's a lot in play, because this probably isn't the appropriate time or place in terms of how to do it correctly. But the select board and town administrator will be working and watching the state and figuring out what happens for phase 2. I want to emphasize again, the scores are just as a guide for us to get the conversation going. So the public, you can see the scores, but please don't email us. We're not going to be changing scores. Just want to get that out there. Yeah, Melissa.
There is another hand raised, Judy Katz.
Okay, let me just finish the announcements and then we'll hear from Judy. There is a public hearing. Please let me get the date right. There's a public hearing scheduled for Monday, April 11th at 7 p.m. Please, it is open for registration. Please sign up to speak. You will have 90 seconds. If you cannot make the public hearing, please email us with your less than 90-second comment, and we will read it into the public hearing record. We have actually agended time to do that. And then finally, for the committee members, I want to thank you 1,000 times. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Cuddy's on me when this is all done, I promise. And by Tuesday, please send to Melissa and Tyler and CC ARPA Review your top funding requests and how you would fund them. All right. And then at the next meeting, we'll start working with that and we'll, start narrowing it down from there. And I am going to then turn to Judy Katz, who has her hand up. Welcome, Judy. Please. I'll answer your question after Judy speaks, Michael. Welcome, Judy. Please let us know what you have to say. Judy, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I understand that the staff is scoring on different criteria than the committee members are using to score. But then I'm not quite sure what the benefit or the value, I don't quite understand why you're then moving to an average, because you're averaging, 2 different sets of criteria or information. So I'm not sure what the value or how that average would be used. Because I would assume certain criteria are weighted in differently from other criteria.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think we just wanted to get a look. This is our first time seeing the scores all together, Judy. I think, again, that this is just to help us figure out which proposals should be going on for discussion. And so I don't think we're gonna, I don't think anybody is gonna say the average is low, therefore we're not moving it forward. We're looking at the scores individually. We just put the average up now for kind of an ease of a way to view it.
It was just to keep it organized.
Yeah, keep it organized. Yes. And there's a question in the chat, and does anyone else have anything to say to that, or? There was a question in the chat about unscored proposals. Those will be scored and those scores will be made public. And will the unscored proposals be scored in addition to funding recommendations made by the committee by Tuesday and before this spreadsheet is posted? We're trying to do everything as transparently as possible. By Tuesday, we're getting our funding recommendations to Melissa and Tyler, but those recommendations will not be available for the public to view until Friday for the next meeting. And that's because we need to do some background on getting it. It's just the office work that has to happen. But it will be made public. And if you have a proposal that doesn't make it to the next round, all of the proposals have comments. And I can't speak for the other committee members, but I'm certainly more than happy to share why I didn't move a proposal on with anybody who has questions about that. Oh, well, you're welcome. So with that, you guys I said it already. I'll say it like 1,000 times more. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Arthur, did you see the email I sent you, by the way? You're on mute. Okay, Arthur will.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so
when-
take
when
a
did
look.
you- When did you send it?
I sent it probably an hour or two ago. But
Then
it's just-
I've had to have seen it, okay?
Okay.
Okay, but I'll get it.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
just want you to know, because yes, I heard you, and I have some ideas for addressing that.
Okay.
All right. So thank you, everybody. Your task, which you have already agreed to accept, your homework is to get your proposals to Melissa and Tyler by Tuesday, end of day. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
And for
Thank you all.
all the public, ARPA review at brooklinemass.gov if you have questions or need to email us. Bye.
Bye.